Vince Gill has spent decades building his name in country music, but in recent years his journey took a turn that no one, not even he, could have predicted. Stepping into one of rock's most sacred spaces, he carried the burden of a legacy that was not his own, while privately wrestling with doubts, tension, and the pressure of replacing someone who could never be replaced. At 67, his quiet words reveal the hidden struggles, the sacrifices, and the haunting truth of what it really means to keep the Eagles alive after Glenn Frey's death. Behind the applause, there was silence. And now, Vince is finally breaking it. From Norman, Oklahoma to Nashville's hard lessons. Vince Gill's story begins far from the spotlight in Norman, Oklahoma, where he was born on April 12, 1957. The youngest of 3 children, he was raised in a household filled with both discipline and music. His father, Stan, was a part-time musician who played banjo and guitar, but also worked as a judge. His mother, Jaren, had her own love for music, often singing around the house. Vince's earliest memories were colored by the sounds of the Grand Ole Opry on the radio, country ballads blending with the rock and roll that was sweeping across America. Music was never distant. It was woven into his upbringing. By the time he was just 5 years old, Vince had already taught himself to play Old Shep on a guitar that belonged to his grandmother. At 8, he performed with his half-brother Bob on a local radio program, covering the Beach Boys' Long Tall Texan. These moments weren't just childhood fun, they marked the beginning of a lifelong obsession. Under the guidance of a local guitarist, J. Julian Aiken, Vince learned discipline, precision, and the art of making a guitar sing. As he grew older, he expanded his reach to fiddle, banjo, mandolin, and bass, hungry to master everything within his grasp. In high school, Vince's world was turned upside down when he fell in love with bluegrass, inspired by a mandolin player he befriended. He started his own group, Mountain Smoke, determined to chase the sound that had captured his heart. But the road was never smooth. When Mountain Smoke opened for Kiss, the hard rock audience turned hostile, throwing objects and booing until Vince stormed off stage in anger, even flipping off the crowd before leaving. It was a humiliating moment, but it also showed the fire in him, the defiance that would drive him through years of rejection and disappointment. From Norman's small stages to Nashville's uncertain promise, Vince was learning the hardest lesson of all, that talent alone was never enough. The long road to breakthrough. By the late 1970s, Vince Gill had carved out a modest name for himself, but he was still far from the star he dreamed of becoming. In 1978, fate gave him a chance when he joined the soft rock group Pure Prairie League. For a brief moment, Vince tasted recognition. He sang lead vocals on their 1980 hit Let Me Love You Tonight, a song that placed him squarely in the public eye. Yet behind the scenes, there was no security. He was just another face in a band already fading from its peak, and he knew he had to step out on his own if he wanted a future. When he moved to Nashville in the early 1980s, the struggle deepened. Vince became a sideman, playing guitar for Rodney Crowell's backing band, the Cherry Bombs. But still, he remained on the margins. In 1984, he took the leap and signed with RCA Records as a solo country artist. The label had hopes, but the results were disappointing. His records earned modest attention, yet commercial success eluded him. For nearly 5 years, he pushed forward, chasing radio hits that never came, questioning whether he had made the right decision. It wasn't until 1989, when he switched to MCA Nashville, that the tide began to turn. With his album When I Call Your Name, Vince finally broke through. The title track earned him a Grammy Award and marked his entry into country music's mainstream. Throughout the 1990s, his career soared. He placed 65 songs on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart, earned 4 solo #1 hits between 1992 and 1994, and achieved platinum certifications with every album released during that decade. His 1992 album, I Still Believe in You, sold over 5 million copies, making it his most successful record. But the triumph came with a cost. Success demanded endless touring, interviews, and the constant pressure to deliver. Vince collected award after award, eventually winning a staggering 22 Grammys, more than any other male country artist, but the glory could never erase the scars from years of doubt and struggle. Beneath the smiles on stage, there remained the quiet truth. Every victory was haunted by memories of how close he had come to being forgotten, from time jumpers to an unexpected call. As the new millennium unfolded, Vince Gill's career entered a quieter phase. He was no longer chasing the radio charts with the same intensity. Instead, he found refuge in collaboration and craftsmanship. From 2010 to 2020, he became part of the Time Jumpers, a Western swing collective in Nashville. For Vince, this was music stripped to its essence. Friends gathering each week to play fiddles, guitars, and steel, more for the love of it than for the spotlight. It was a stark contrast to the pressures of his country stardom, and it gave him something he desperately needed: space to breathe. But in early 2016, the music world was shaken when Glenn Frey, co-founder of the Eagles, passed away. The band seemed finished. Their songs were monuments of an era, and without Frey, many believed the curtain had closed for good. Vince, like millions of fans, mourned the loss from afar. He could never have imagined what would happen next. One ordinary day in 2017, his phone rang. On the other end was Irving Azoff, the Eagles' longtime manager. Vince was told the band wanted him to join, to stand in Glenn Frey's place. At first, he thought it was a joke. How could a country artist from Oklahoma be asked to step into the shoes of a man whose voice had defined some of the most iconic songs in rock history? But Azoff was serious. Don Henley himself had insisted that Vince was the only person they had considered. The request filled Vince with both honor and dread. He knew he could never replace Glenn, no one could. But he also knew the offer was about more than filling a vacancy. It was about carrying forward a legacy that mattered to millions. Still, questions haunted him. Why him? Could he really fit into a band with such a vast and complicated history? Accepting meant leaving behind the comfort of his own solo career and walking into a storm of expectation. Yet Vince said yes, fully aware that his life would never be the same again. The weight of legacy and the breaking point. When Vince Gill first stepped onto the stage with the Eagles in 2017, the surface told one story. The harmonies blended, the guitars rang true, and the audience cheered as though nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, the reality was much heavier. Vince was entering a band whose history was lined with scars, conflicts, and reconciliations that stretched back decades. He had his own long career, but here he was the outsider, expected to fill a role that no one else could carry. Rehearsals were grueling. The Eagles were famous for their meticulous precision, dissecting every note until it was flawless. That pressure fell hardest on Vince. Every time he sang Glenn Frey's lines or strummed through an old classic, he felt the eyes of the band, the crew, and the fans upon him. Could he live up to the legacy of a founder? The doubt followed him everywhere. The tension reached a breaking point during one rehearsal. Vince had suggested a subtle new arrangement for one of their classics, trying to honor the original while adding freshness. But not everyone agreed. Voices rose, tempers flared, and suddenly Vince found himself at the center of a storm. What began as a small creative dispute spiraled into an argument that left him shaken. Later that night, alone in his hotel room, he replayed the moment in his head, asking himself whether he belonged at all. For the first time, he thought about quitting. Returning to his solo career would have meant control, familiarity, and the freedom to play his songs his way. But leaving would also mean walking away from the chance to honor Glenn Frey's memory and to contribute to one of the greatest bands in American music. It was a tormenting choice, and Vince confessed years later that he had never felt more like an outsider than in those early days with the Eagles. Then, unexpectedly, Don Henley pulled him aside. Away from the rehearsal room's chaos, Henley reassured him. He told Vince his presence was valued, that his role was not about replacing Glenn, but about carrying the music forward with respect. That quiet conversation steadied Vince, and it became the turning point that kept him in the band. Restraint, respect, and the battle for acceptance. As Vince Gill settled into his place with the Eagles, he began to change, not by stepping into the spotlight, but by learning to step back. In his country career, he had long been known for letting his guitar sing, often filling songs with elaborate solos and flourishes that carried his unmistakable touch. But in the Eagles, the structure was different, and so was his role. Joe Walsh was already the band's blazing guitar hero, a larger-than-life figure whose leads had been etched into rock history. For Vince, that meant shifting into the quieter, steadier role of rhythm guitarist. To some, this might have felt like a demotion, a limitation that would chafe against the ego of a man who had once ruled Nashville's charts. Yet for Vince, now in his late 60s, it became an opportunity to embrace something he had grown to value deeply: restraint. In an interview with Guitar World, he admitted that age had changed his approach. "I know what's needed and don't waste time playing stuff that no one wants to hear," he explained. "As I've gotten older, I spend more time thinking about what not to play. That's very different from when I was young and constantly thinking about playing as much as possible." Brevity, patience, and silence had become his tools. It was not about showing off, but about serving the music. And in Vince's eyes, that was the highest form of respect. More than once, he reminded interviewers and audiences that he did not see himself as an owner of the Eagles' music. "I don't take ownership of a single note," he said. "That would be foolish. My job is to honor the songs and play them as they deserve to be played." It was humility rare in an industry built on ego and reinvention. Fans who bought tickets to hear Hotel California or Take It to the Limit wanted to relive the songs as they were written, not as experiments. Vince understood this and gave them exactly that: faithful, reverent performances where the music came first. Still, the road to acceptance was not simple. When news first broke that Vince would be joining the Eagles, many fans felt unsettled. Glenn Frey was irreplaceable, and the idea of anyone else standing in his place felt almost sacrilegious. Social media debates erupted. Some praised Vince's pedigree, pointing to his Grammy wins and decades of proven musicianship. Others accused the band of diluting their legacy, claiming that no substitute, no matter how talented, could fill the void Glenn had left behind. Vince bore those criticisms in silence. He carried himself with dignity, always speaking of Glenn with reverence. He made it clear that he was not there to replace him, but to preserve his music. His honesty and humility began to chip away at the skepticism. Slowly, audiences realized he was not competing with Glenn's ghost, but standing beside it, keeping the songs alive. His voice and guitar blended into the fabric of the band, not as an intruder, but as a caretaker. The sphere, the long goodbye, and the silence broken. In recent years, Vince Gill's role with the Eagles has taken him to stages unlike anything he could have imagined. Among them was the Sphere in Las Vegas, a futuristic dome where the entire ceiling and walls become part of the show. For Vince, the experience was surreal and unsettling. "It's the most people I've ever been ignored by," he joked, admitting that audiences were often more focused on the overwhelming visuals than on the musicians themselves. To him, music had always been about sound and honesty, not about flying Volkswagens or dazzling graphics. He confessed that he never liked music videos for the same reason. Songs, he believed, should paint pictures in the listener's mind, not force them onto a screen. That quiet discomfort spoke volumes about his perspective. For Vince, a great concert was not about explosions or spectacle. It was about a crowd and an artist connecting, lifting each other higher through nothing more than songs and emotion. Whether at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville or under the bright glare of the Sphere, he remained the same man with the same guitar, doing his best to honor the music. Today, as the Eagles move through the long goodbye tour scheduled to continue into 2025, Vince Gill remains at the center of a bittersweet chapter. Alongside Don Henley, Joe Walsh, Timothy B. Schmidt, and Deacon Frey, he plays night after night, helping to close the book on one of the most enduring bands in American history. Yet behind the professionalism and the polished performances, Vince has admitted that the early years left him shaken. He felt like an outsider, burdened by the impossible task of filling Glenn Frey's place. There were moments when he nearly walked away, moments when the silence of self-doubt was louder than any applause. At 67, Vince Gill has finally spoken those words aloud. His honesty reveals the cost of stepping into greatness, of living in the shadow of another man's legacy, and of carrying songs that will outlive them all. It is not triumph that defines his journey with the Eagles. It is sacrifice, restraint, and the quiet ache of never fully belonging. Vince Gill's story with the Eagles is not just about music, but about humility, struggle, and the weight of legacy. Do you think Vince has managed to honor Glenn Frey's memory in the right way? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.